Compression is one of the most fun and exciting ways to shape the tone of your drum sounds. No matter what console you're on, no matter what compressor you've got, you're going to learn how to compress kick, snare, and overheads and get the tone that you want out of your compression. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. I post new content every week to help you make every worship mix an enjoyable one. Compression on drums can totally transform your mix. It can add punch, sustain, impact, or snap, or it can totally ruin your drum sounds if you jack it up. Now only start compressing after you've EQ'd it and check the polarity on all your drum mics. Your compressor can't add any punch that's not there because two mics are out of polarity.
With all these mixing techniques, it also is worth saying that great sounds start at the source. You can't polish a turd. Well, you can, but you have to freeze it first. And then you just have a cold, shiny turd. And who wants a cold, shiny turd?
So for today's tutorial, we're going to be focusing on the attack and release times of the compressor. So we're going to put our compressor in peak mode. We're going to set our ratio to 4:1 and leave our knee hard. The attack and the release times are going to make the most difference in how the tone changes. We want to leave the rest of those constant so we can really hear what the attack and release do. All right, let's listen to a snare that's got cadence rolls and hits and see what the compression does. I set my attack time to about 15 milliseconds and I set my release time to about 50 milliseconds. We'll adjust those more later, but I want you to hear the difference between compressed and uncompressed with the cadence rolls and the hits. All right, so the first thing that I noticed is that it changed the balance between the cadence rolls and the hits. It brought the cadence rolls up a little bit more and added a little bit more interest. This is going to be really helpful in getting those little details to come out in our mix. Now, the other thing that compression does is changes the tone of the drum by the shape of the transient. In essence, our attack time is going to be our tone control, where slower equals thicker and faster equals thinner. Let's go to a different part of the song and we'll listen to the attack time at 15 milliseconds, 7 milliseconds, and 3 milliseconds, and hear what that feels like. All right, so the faster we get, the thinner it gets. It gets a little bit more snappy as we go from 15 to 7 to 3. Now it's up to you what you like, whether you like it more punchy or if you like it more in your face, but those are just some of the mixing decisions that you can now make once you understand the tools. Now I typically won't go beyond 15 milliseconds for the snare drum. If I go much slower than 15 milliseconds, it's going to start to lose its effectiveness on that transient. All right, now let's listen to the kick drum. Because the kick drum's fundamental frequency is lower, I can set my attack time a little bit slower to get a little bit deeper punch out of it. On this set, I have a kick in and a kick out. We'll start with the kick in microphone and see what it does for that. All right, did you hear how the compression added a little bit more sustain in addition to the punch? That's one more thing to think about when changing the relationship of the kick and the bass is how much the kick is sustaining. And remember, it's all about the low end. You get that right, everything else falls into place. All right, let me speed up the attack time on the kick drum and listen to how the beater sound comes out more than the thump. You hear how we got more click from the beater hitting the drum head. That can be helpful if you have a duller kick drum and you want it to stand out in the mix just a little bit more for that note definition. Since we're talking about adding the beater sound to the kick drum, let's move to the kick out microphone and see what the compression does there. Listen as I toggle it back and forth. This attack time is set to about 7 milliseconds. So we were able to enact a pretty good tone change just by adding compression without having to change the EQ. It's not the only solution, but it's another tool in your tool belt that you can use to get the sounds you want. With overheads, compression gets a little trickier because you've got more than one input coming into those microphones. The balance can vary a lot between how the microphones are placed and how hard the drummer's hitting the snare compared to the cymbals. If we want to change the balance between our snare and our cymbals in the overheads, we can use a fast attack and release to compress the snare drum only out of it so that we're left with mostly just cymbals. Let's take a listen. So you can see how we're just compressing the transient of the snare and the overheads so that we can bring the overheads level up overall without getting more snare. Now if we crank down a little bit further on the threshold, we'll start to compress our cymbals as well, and that'll give us more sustain on the cymbals overall. It can also help if you've got a drummer that's out of control, not in a cage, and you don't want to turn up the cymbals any more through the PA when they're really digging in. So let's take a listen. Do you notice how the hi-hat stayed about in the same place, but the crash cymbal got a lot more sustain? That's one more thing that compression can do, and another tool that you can stick in your tool belt. All right, those are the very basics of getting started with compression on drums. So if this video was helpful for you, go ahead and hit thumbs up. Subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. And be sure to comment below and let me know what tutorials you'd like to see in the future. And if you want to be a more valuable asset on your worship team, download my free guide, How to Lead Your Church Sound Team. The link's in the description below. We'll see you next time.